finally coming out. It's breaking a little bit. We had a very foggy morning, but we have a very fun project today. This is something that we've been really looking forward to. In one of our last tours, we talked about that we had an old decrepit fence, and now we have this new woven wire fence, which looks really beautiful. This is part of our deer fence tactics, having an 8-foot high fence. Well, we couldn't really plant anything along the fence line because we knew we were going to change it out. Now that we have a new fence, we're going to create, I would say, a loose privacy hedge. And I say privacy in quotations because a lot of folks will want to feel protected from the road. And I think what this land affords us is that it's a little bit higher than the road. And we don't have a tremendous amount of neighbors, and the neighbors that we do have, a lot of them will walk their dogs or walk on the road. And it's actually nice to see the neighbors, like they'll often wave, or we'll have like the slow drivers like wave who know us. And that's kind of fun. So I don't want to totally block off the road. And so the way that I'm approaching it is basically just creating some visual interest that gives you enough privacy where you could still see through the leaves and the vines, but doesn't completely block you away and create like your own private garden room, which garden, as we all know, maybe we don't all know, but really derives from an enclosure or a room, a living room, so to speak. So I thought we could play around and be fun with this, and I had envisioned having an Espalier apples on here, not the full length, but you'll see that I have some pre-trained Espalier trees, actually that came from Rain Tree Nursery. I don't know why, but they sent them when it was still freezing outside here. And I asked them to send them later, but they had already shipped them in the mail. So they came bare root. And normally when you get bare root, you want to plant right away. And the way that I kind of cheat it, and it's worked for me in the past, and people please comment if this has ever happened to you, but the way that I cheat it is that I soak the roots in advance. Normally you soak them for like an hour or something to keep them hydrated after they get shipped. Make sure that the water's not freezing cold. I usually do tepid water. And then you typically would plant them right away into the hole, but what I do just to kind of cheat it, since I wasn't able to plant them right away because the ground was still frozen, is that I just put some of like the potting medium. I just use a Spoma potting medium, and I put them in some of our old big pots, and I potted them up in here temporarily, and then I'm going to be putting them into the ground. But just to give you a little back history of an Espalier tree, obviously you can see it's kind of flat. Espaliers derived probably from ancient Egyptian times and then got picked up and popularized more in Europe. So especially during like the Middle Ages and Victorian ages, and in the gardens they'd have them against usually stone walls, but I don't see why we can't have it against a fence. We obviously don't have a stone wall here. And we just recently saw them on the Biltmore Historic Garden tours, and I made mention of them. They had them there on the I think they were stone, maybe it was clay walls. But it was just so beautiful to see them. Now, these ones that we have 3 different apple varieties that have been grafted on. So this one's William's Pride, this one is Liberty, and this one here says that it's Enterprise. And I know all of those are really good eating apples, and the concept behind this is you usually need another apple. They're not typically self-fertile, so you'll need another apple to pollinate. So the fact that these have 3 different apple varieties that bloom around the same time, they'll pollinate one another, and they just happen to be on different planes. And like I said, they're all good eating apples. I believe the Liberty apple, and I could be misrepresenting this, but I believe this was actually developed just right around here in Geneva, New York. And the Enterprise apple, I think, is actually a relatively new apple from like the late 80s or the early 90s. So, you know, some apple varieties you'll get, and they're like from the 1700s, 1800s, and then you get some that are relatively new. But you want, in an Espalier, I'm not an Espalier expert, but I know typically you'll want to get apples that are more spur-bearing. So that means that they produce fruit closer to the trunk. So you wouldn't want apples kind of hanging out on the ends to kind of, dangle your espalier branches off. So these will continue to grow outwards, and we'll have to continue to train them. Sometimes they'll stick a stem out this way, and either those you'll want to tack back or you'll want to clip them, because the whole idea is to have it on basically a 2D plane. So that's what we're going to do today, and I'm going to share with you the other vines that we're going to be planting. And this to me is less of a privacy hedge and more of like a wildlife hedge. And I wanted to focus on, you'll hear like a car because obviously we're right on the side of the road, so that will help like blocking some of the sound. But for the whole time we're shooting here, you're probably not going to see that many cars because we don't have many cars out on this road, luckily. I'll say that and I'll completely jinx myself. Everybody will be going to work, or there'll be a big event happening. I will say on the vines, I really wanted to focus on vines that could be insect host plants, so butterfly and insect host plants. And I think that will be great because it'll bring butterflies to the yard. But we'll focus on the espalier trees first. And you can see that we covered the hole. We had pre-dug a hole. Sandra came in and helped pre-dig this hole. And I tried to pre-dig as many holes as possible so you don't see me struggling with that. But I'm going to pull this right out. And as a matter of fact, I should probably get the hose and water this in. So one moment, let me get the hose. All right, so we have a little bit of native soil. So, like I said, this isn't really planted in, but I did pack it in. I'm gonna amend some of the soil down in here, which is typically I wouldn't like to do that. When Sandra dug the hole, you kind of put the native soil in around other places in the holes, so we don't have all of the native soil here. Look at this. I think this was like, this looks like a dahlia or something. I don't know what tuber that is. So I'm gonna try to get this out without breaking any of the roots. And you'll see like sometimes a bare root will come and it'll have a lot of fibrous roots. This didn't have a tremendous amount of fibrous roots. And you have to put it in, normally I would wanna put it in this way, but the way that the root is structured, but I think I'm gonna have to put it in this way because you want it to be close to the fence line and you want it to grow on the fence line. And we'll probably even train it to the fence if we might have little cordons to kind of cordon it to the fence. But I'm gonna get it to about here. And I'm just gonna add some of the soil in just to make sure that it's in there, and then I'll water it in. What's nice about planting it here is that it is on the downslope already. And so it'll capture quite a lot of water before the water goes off the land. Look at those worms. I'm gonna put it on top. And this will probably invite the chipmunk to be like, oh, I'm gonna put my seeds in here. Kind of a strange place to plant because it's on the downhill, but the water is gonna get caught up in here anyway. Just a little biotone booster. You could also put this in the hole. All right, so the other one is right over here, and we're right by the tree swallows, so let's see how they like us in their vicinity. So this is gonna be our second tree, and I kind of wanted this, there's a peony that was planted right here, so I kind of wanted this like a little bit more central to the meadow house and equidistant away from either side of the birdhouse. And these espaliers, I mean, these provide a lot of opportunity because they don't get too high. You have ease of picking the fruit. It provides some privacy, it provides some interest, and it also provides some wildlife value as well. Just fill it back up in there. Sorry to steal it from your hole. See what that root structure looks like. And again, like I said, these came out pretty clean, bare roots, but couldn't plant them right away, so decided to do it this way. I think this might work better.
Yeah, how deep should the top root be?
I think you should
compared to the soil.
I think you should plant it right where the soil line had been. Typically with these bare roots, they take them out from the land where they're growing them. So I would say right around there. All the grafting is actually done here. They might have done a graft on the rootstock to have a specific rootstock, but this whole thing is the rootstock, and then they just actually graft it on the stems instead. Typically, you would see a graft line around here, but you could see where the soil line was, so that's where I would put it. Add some of the soil. Yep, thank you for holding that. All right, so the first vine that we're going to be planting is one that I have tried to get my hands on for a little while, and I was really looking forward to planting this. So I hope it works out, is what I'm saying. But this is called Dutchman's pipe or pipe vine. It doesn't look like much now, but this is a common plant that's grown on arbors. Its name is Aristolochia macrophylla or macrophylla, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Macrophylla means large leaf, so it gets fairly large leaves. They're a bit more cordate or heart-shaped, and they become quite overlapping. So this plant, out of all the plants that we're planting, will probably give the most quote-unquote privacy, because it grows, I would say, 8 to 20 feet tall. So it'll clamber up and probably spill over to the other side. And then as it gets about 10 to maybe even up to 20 feet wide. So it'll grow quite large over the course of a couple seasons. It won't get that large the first year you plant this. Is obviously a pretty small plant. So I'll be curious to see how much it actually grows that first season, but it's not like it grows that in a first season all at once. I do have another vine that I'll show you that grows quite quickly. But again, part of the reason why I wanted to plant this is not necessarily for full privacy per se from the neighbors, but also as a wildlife hedge. And this is the host plant for the pipevine swallowtail. So I haven't seen a pipevine swallowtail in the area, but if we plant these and enough of these, I hope that we could actually attract some of those. We have other swallowtails which use other host plants, but the pipevine swallowtail specifically uses this one, and it is a native vine. So I also plan to plant another one, so I wanted it equidistant from the fence, or from the birdhouse. So we have one fence panel and then half of this fence panel. And this will eventually grow towards that birdhouse, and the birdhouse will be like in the vines, which I think would be kind of nice for the bird, whoever chooses to be there.
It goes that far, huh?
It goes that far. So I didn't want to plant it too close to the gates, because obviously then we're going to be dealing with trying to open up the gates with the vines on it.
Does it get woody at all?
It doesn't get as woody, like it doesn't get woody like the wisteria does, which is why, you know, putting that wooden post near the wisteria I think is a good move. And honestly, I don't even know if that's a Wisteria chinensis or if that's one of our native wisterias. We don't have a wisteria that grows in New York, but native to the US, I mean, and those actually grow a little less robust than the Chinese version of the wisteria vine, which is the one that typically most people plant, unfortunately. So I'm not going to need to amend this very much. I'm just going to put a little compost on it just to kind of protect it from basically getting overtaken by grass. But I'm not going to be worried about once this actually gets started. We might have to keep the grass off of this the first season, because this grass is quite aggressive. But I think after the first season, this is gonna be fine on its own. We might have to train it up on the...
You better put a flag in that because you won't be able to find it.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I just thought it was easier to actually pour some in the bucket. And a big white flag. All right, so this one's a little bit more robust. You can see it almost looks like a bean plant, but this one seems to have transported better, grown a little bit better, so it has a lot more leaves on it. So we're just gonna plant this here. And I have a third one, but that's gonna go. I think I'm gonna plant that later and probably put it into the forest. All right, there you go. Okay, so I have 2 more vines that I'm looking to plant on this fence. And the last 2 that I have here is one that I just actually picked up in town. One of our local growers is growing it, and kind of looks like a grape leaf, but it's Humulus lupulus, which is hops. Now this is not a native plant, and most people will know that hops is grown primarily for the beer, to make beer. And it's also used as an herb. So this one is called Crystal, I think the cultivar is. Now hops could also grow pretty tall, so it could grow maybe 8 feet to 15 feet tall. And it grows pretty aggressively in the first year, unlike the Aristolochia that I had just showed you. But it doesn't grow as wide, so maybe 6 to 8 feet wide. And I don't know if this is a male or female one. So typically you have males that produce like hundreds of little flowers, and then you have the females that have a larger flower that produces the flower that you basically then collect off the hops. I'm not necessarily interested right now in harvesting anything. This, even though it's not a native plant, has been adapted by at least 2 of our butterfly species that I know of, and that's comma and question mark. You may feel like you're like dictating to your phone, but we do have butterflies that are called a comma butterfly and a question mark butterfly, and it's partially because of the shapes of their wings. They kind of are all like gnarly looking, and I guess it looks a little bit like a comma and a question mark. But yeah, so this one I figured, I already dug the hole, and it's not in the middle of the fence panel, which is what I was going to ask you if you think that's actually okay.
Yeah, that's fine. It's
growing
to this tree, and it will be behind that.
Right. So I figured for the length that it actually grows and the height that it grows, it would be nice right here. Yeah. So that's what I'm going to do right now. And this looks like a nice healthy one. It's kind of kinked in some areas. What I like about it is that it was grown locally. So sometimes I'll get trees or plants that were not grown locally. For example, I just got some trees delivered and they were grown in the Carolinas. So they're actually already leafed out, which is, most of the trees here are not leafed out. So it's nice to see some leaves, but it's not necessarily adapted yet for our area. But this has been grown by a local grower. Actually, he told me that his daughter tends to grow the herbs. So like I said, this one's a little kinked, but I think it's growing just fine. And the way that it's twining, you could already see that this is going to be a good gripper. So I'm expecting that this will grow to its full length in one season. And like I said, it has been adapted. And a lot of non-native plants have been adapted by our local butterflies or moths. And I think it would be actually fun to do an episode on the plants that are host plants for butterflies. So maybe that will be a future episode for some of our more common butterflies, because we often talk about pollinator plants, and that's been kind of the go-to if you go to any independent garden center and you go there and you see a whole thing for pollinator plants, but you never really see anything for host plants. And, you know, our butterflies, before they become butterflies, are caterpillars and they need something to eat, right? So these are some of the plants that they eat in advance. Now this doesn't give as dense of shade as the Aristolochia or as dense of like privacy. And typically if I were like growing this as a crop, oftentimes they're grown and trained on like these big spires. But you know, what we have here is a fence line and that's what we're going to be growing this on. Actually, if we ever wanted to have like an arbor or anything, the Aristolochia would be really pretty. Although I've read that it's actually quite flammable. So people wouldn't typically put it like on their house. Like if you had an arbor that's coming off of your house. So I don't know how truthful that is, but I will make mention of it. Okay, so this is the final one. And this is actually going to be the smallest vine that we're planting. And this is native, although not to New York, it's native to the United States. And this is one of our Loniceras. This is Lonicera dioica. And so it's our honeysuckle, not like the non-native honeysuckles like that Sandra and I have been taking out, hence that pile of honeysuckle and multiflora rose, which is just about everywhere. This is actually commonly called limber honeysuckle, which I think is a pretty good name for it because it's not quite a vine and it's not quite a shrub. So it's, somebody had mentioned the other day when we were doing a tour, it's kind of one of those high functioning drunks that just kind of needs something to lean on. Still standing up, but is leaning on it. So I thought this is really great to go on a fence line. You could espalier this as well, so you could train it to go out in different angles. And this is the host plant for our snowberry and hummingbird clearwings, which we have. I planted snowberry and a number of other plants, and I actually have seen those hummingbird moths and those snowberry clearwings. And it's also the host plant for a variety of sphinx moths as well. So now this one only grows to about 3 to 8 feet high and about 3 to 6 feet wide. So it just really needs a panel. And I'm just wondering whether you think maybe it should be that panel right there, just to the right of
space.
This could have its own panel, essentially.
Yeah, okay. I'd go a little further to the right.
A little further, like this?
It's kind of cool to have it around that birdhouse too.
Yeah, like this? Because this only gets to be about 3 to 6 feet wide.
Okay, well, actually, I liked your original position more. Like
okay. I like that too, because it may or may not reach.
It doesn't get so wide.
Yes.
It may not reach.
It doesn't, I don't think it'll reach actually the top of this, and I don't think it'll reach very much on the other side. I mean, I'd be surprised. But this actually gets a nice, like nice little tubular red flowers. So even though I was mentioning that it's a great host plant for insects, it's also a wonderful plant for hummingbirds. That red tubular flower is perfect. And then it gets this nice orange reddish berry towards the end of the season after it flowers. Then birds will eat that. It's not really edible to humans, but birds, especially during the migration, will eat the berries. So it's just an all-around great food plant. Now, when it's a host plant for insects, oftentimes they're not eating the whole plant down. So I wouldn't worry about that. Some people get worried when they're like, oh, if I plant a host plant, I'm not gonna have any of the plant left. Well, that's not entirely true. I mean, we had a swallowtail, black swallowtail on our fennel, Funiculum vulgare, and the funiculum is quite mighty. Like one black swallowtail is not going to eat it down. The last vine I'd like to plant, but I don't have it, is the passiflora. So our native passiflora incarnata, which has a most beautiful flower. It's a great pollinator plant. And I have to admit, I'm not sure if it's a host plant for any specific insect. I would imagine it is, but it's a really pretty vine. And all of these vines are deciduous, so they will lose their leaves in the winter months.
so they have to redo their whole thing. Oh no, I guess they keep their stems, so they'll keep growing.
Yes, but you could actually cut back some of these stems as well. Not to the point that you cut them completely off at the root, but yeah, they will have to like regrow their leaves, like that clematis vine that we have in the meadow house planter. So I need a flag for this, or else we're gonna come in here and unceremoniously decapitate both of these. But that's pretty much it, and we'll keep you updated as the seasons unfold, because I sense that some of these are going to start to grow. I mean, we're not gonna probably see that much happening with the espaliers or the apples. And I would eventually like to actually try to espalier an apple tree myself and train it, but I kind of cheated a little bit and saw that it was already done, because you have to wait, you know, 3 years in order to kind of get to that place with that apple. So I was happy that somebody else did it, and the fact that they had multiple different types of apples, and then we could have fruit for folks staying in the meadow house. I think that's gonna be great. So I hope that survives. I hope everything survives, and we'll show you the updates throughout the year. A special thanks to all of our members on this channel who support us in our endeavors. If you're interested in becoming a member, go to our YouTube homepage and click join. And if you enjoy educational videos like this one, then be sure to hit like, subscribe, and the notifications button. Those small actions help us grow, help others find content like this, and allows you to know when a new video releases. And 10% of our Google AdSense proceeds are reinvested back into community-based projects in the Finger Lakes region of New York, and that's matched by our partners over at Espoma Organic. So your support really does go a long way. We'll see you in the next video.